The first thing I would say is that nothing beats being on the podium and conducting my own music. Other people conduct it better than I do, I think, because they don't have that connection. I'm too close to it. They study the score differently, sense possibilities differently than I do. But on the same token, it's just as a personal kind of thing. This music used to just be floating around in your head, and all of a sudden it's coming out of the tip of your baton. That's pretty amazing.
Welcome to Director's Circle, a podcast featuring insights from music educators and school leaders discussing their philosophies on the administrative leadership of a comprehensive music program. I'm Doug Conrad, and today's guest is Dr. Timothy Mahr from Northfield, Minnesota. Let's begin. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Director's Circle. I'm Doug Conrad. Thank you so much for listening. If you're enjoying the podcast, make sure to get on your phone. Yes, you can do it right now. And head on over to applications like Spotify, iTunes, Google Play Music, and even iHeartRadio to subscribe to the show to stay updated on all future episodes and to even check out our previous episodes as well. And if you even like us even more, you can head on over to Facebook, look us up under Director's Circle, and like our page to stay updated on all future episodes and events. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube to even like us even more. So with that said, today's guest is a very special person to bring on the podcast, as not only is he a renowned conductor and educator, but also is a renowned composer, especially for wind band. Today's guest is Dr. Timothy Mahr. Dr. Mahr is a professor of music at St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota, where he is the conductor of the St. Olaf Band and also teaches courses in composition, conducting, and music education. So, without further ado, here's my episode with none other than Dr. Timothy Mahr. Hello, Tim. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, so to start a little with everything, could you please tell us about yourself and your professional background?
Well, I'm sitting at the desk in my office here at St. Olaf College. I'm in my 26th year here. I feel really privileged to have been chosen to take over the reins of my predecessor here, Miles Johnson. And before that, I was at the University of Minnesota Duluth teaching for 10 years. I did graduate work at the University of Iowa, Go Hawks, both my doctorate in instrumental conducting, the DMA degree, and then a master's in trombone performance there. And previous to that, I was a student here at St. Olaf College myself, graduating a long time ago in the previous century.
Oh, certainly a lot. So to speak on your band program at St. Olaf College, can you talk a little bit about your program, what ensembles you oversee, the numbers, and anything that your students may have done over the past few years?
Currently, we're operating as a rather large concert band. We started the fall with 99 members on our roster. We have a second band on campus, the Norseman Band. They were at 101. And so we're looking into how to create a third band as an option here. Typically, that's a staffing issue more than anything else. And I'm trying to continue the long tradition we've had here of having a full-sized symphonic concert band. And I appreciate the sound that I can get out of that ensemble. I can always cut the numbers down and become a really potent wind ensemble whenever the need arises. But I'm also able to, include everybody who's sitting in front of me into the creation of grand statements. We just got back from our tour out to California this year and had our home concert just a couple nights ago. And the finale of the David Maslanka's Second Symphony was our closer, and some of those massive sonorities that he has in the end of that piece sound great with a wind ensemble, but we're about twice the size of a wind ensemble, and so it's an incredibly powerful moment coming from a big band like that. And so that's the kind of concert band I'm running here. And it was that way when I was a student here. It was probably numbering closer to the upper 80s or so back then. This was in the 1970s. And I've just been expanding the instrumentation a little bit. I live in the lap of luxury where I can have 4 bass clarinets and a contralto clarinet, and a contrabass clarinet, string bass, contrabassoon, 3 bassoons. That kind of bottom to that woodwind choir sound is an incredibly luxurious option when making of band music. We just put out a book entitled Milestones and Memories, the St. Olaf Band, 1891 to 2018. And it highlights all of these wonderful anecdotes, the programming, the personnel, conductors, and so on that this storied program has had. We celebrated our 125th season in 2016, had all sorts of great things happen that year, including a massive alumni band celebration at the end of the year. The peak experience, however, was the performance at Carnegie Hall. We feel quite blessed to have had an administration that felt it was important for us to go out and make that kind of statement on a national level during that important year. We commissioned David Maslanka to write a piece for us, and he was out in New Jersey for our concert right before the Carnegie Hall concert, and then he was at Carnegie Hall working with us at both sites. That was the second time we had him work with the band. He was with us previously way back in 2001, and ever since that initial one, we've been making his music happen annually practically. We've got a number of CDs out with his music on it, and we culminated our relationship with him by awarding him an honorary doctorate back in 2016. Right after the Carnegie Hall experience, he came to campus and gave an address to the faculty and students, and we performed some of his music, and he is now a St. Olaf alum, and we're very proud to say that. What was truly surprising to me about this was that this was his first honorary doctoral degree. I would have thought that some of these other institutions who are champions of his music would have awarded him a degree like that many times over. And so I'm really glad that we did it. He passed away just a year later, and I don't know if he was able to have another one awarded to him before he passed or not, but I'm glad that we were able to honor him in that way.
Yeah, that's certainly a lot, and it's really cool to hear about the relationship you were able to have with David Maslanka, especially through the work you've done with your ensemble and him as well. So, where that's an interesting story I could see here is so in addition to your work as a conductor, you are also well respected in the industry for your work as a composer. So, could you talk a little bit, maybe just about whenever you were collaborating with him on different endeavors that you have done, just what that relationship is like, one being a conductor and director of the music of from his library, but also just being a fellow composer and trying to approach that, or if there were any unique things that came out of that relationship, so to speak, with someone like him during that time.
Well, that first of all reminds me of the fact that we actually met each other back in 1987. Or pardon me, 1985 is when we first met at the CBDNA convention when his Symphony No. 2 finale was premiered by the University of Iowa Band. I had just started teaching at UMD, and Dr. Myron Welch had also programmed my Fantasia in G on that program, and that was when I first had a chance to shake David's hand. I sent him a recording of a lengthy work that I had written entitled Passages. It's a solo piano and band piece of about 18 minutes duration or so. And this was long before the days of compact discs and digital recordings, and so he got a cassette tape from me. And this very busy man took the time to write me about a 3-page letter where he started a stopwatch and would tell me that at the 4-minute 32-second mark, this is what I'm hearing in your music. Have you considered doing this? try maybe bringing the dynamic down here. I'd sent the score as well, and all throughout this letter, he had was just dropping these pearls of wisdom on a younger composer. And to this day, I cherish the letter first of all, but I also feel like that was a turning point in my writing career. He opened up my eyes to possibilities. And in all honesty, I teach composition, and I've tried to keep that in the forefront of my mind when I'm working with my students, or if someone sends me a score. Now that I'm one of the old guys, I try to make sure that I'm not necessarily rewriting their music, but rather just saying, here's the potential I hear in your music at this point. You decided to do this. You also could have done these other options. Let's think through those as well. And that's I found to be a fruitful way to help a young artist refine their language. Since working with him, we started in 2001 with Symphony Number 5. When I brought him to campus, he was this was just weeks after the 9/11 incidents, and the planes had finally started flying again. I don't know if you remember how quiet the skies were back then, but to have no planes for that period of time was sort of shattering. And he was a little fearful about getting on a plane and coming to campus, but we got him here. And we were going out on a fall tour to Montana, and he stood next to me I was on the podium, and he had his score open. And we had only been together as a band for about 3 weeks. This was in the 20th of September when he came out here. And he just had a very quiet demeanor, but an incredibly professional level of demand. And he would just ask us to do that better, get it up to tempo. I need more of this, and they were motivated to work really hard for him. And I point to that time in 2001 as being a very pivotal moment in the life of my band. And I would think many other directors could probably say the same thing. If you had David Mislanket come in and work with your group, you came out changed on the other end of the experience. He lifted the band, which was already a very good band. We had already played at the American Bandmasters Association convention and stuff like this, and were known for a high quality product. And he just took us from one level up to another level in a matter of a couple of days. And what really helped that even more so is that when we got out to Montana on the tour, he hopped in his car and he drove along with the buses, and he came to, I think it was 3 concerts, and would eat with the band and watch our skits, and just to give us a little bit of feedback with each performance. And we got to know each other better. And his music just, as it does with so many, it got deep within our psyche and soul. And we returned to it ever since. We've got a CD out that has the 4th and 5th Symphony on it. And then a little bit later, we put out a double CD set that had 7th and 8th Symphony, Child's Garden, Give Us This Day, Mother Earth, I think, is on there. The finale to Symphony Number 2 we have on another disc. We gave a full performance of Symphony 9. That's the one that's about 75 minutes long. It was the entire show. Yeah, it's just been a great run. It was between our band and David as a person and David as a composer. It really changed things for us here.
Yeah, and those are certainly some great stories. I know in a lot of things I have read or have overheard from conversations at conferences and the like, just how remarkable of not only composer but as a human being he was, especially for as you even kind of talked about, just the way he would go about getting to know musicians, not only as performers of his music, but as also as people. That's really remarkable to say about him as a human being. So then to get back a little bit now to your program at St. Olaf College, especially with one thing, aside from the band program and all the great things that you all have accomplished, is the music department in general, especially with the other performance ensembles, and especially within a recent article in SBO magazine, it really talked about with the music department as a whole having a high level of excellence in all of the ensembles offered throughout the campus. So could you talk a little bit about how you and your colleagues work together to maintain this comprehensive excellence in your school?
We respect each other. That's the first thing. The director of the St. Olaf Choir, Anton Armstrong, and I were classmates graduating back in 1978. We've known each other most of our adult life. Steve Amundsen, the director of the orchestra, is a year older than us, and he's a Luther grad, so he had a very similar background, Luther College, I should clarify. My jazz colleague, David Hagedorn, we taught together up at the University of Minnesota Duluth, and we both ended up down here teaching together again. And it's a wonderful level of support here for music making that we get from our administration. We enjoy an Office of Music Organizations that is 5 people deep with 2 more interns. And so there's a manager of the choir, manager of the band and orchestra. There's people handling marketing, social media, mechanical rights for the St. Olaf records that we had for so many years. We had our own CD label. It was an incredible amount of support for the touring as well. The orchestra and the band go out for about a 9 or 10 day tour every year, and the choir extends that to a full 2-week tour every year. We tour internationally every 4 years, and these kinds of experiences when you're touring especially allow you to get at the music night after night. I mean, we just got back from a sort of a short tour. We only had 6 days in California. That's a short one for us. But we perform the same program at night after night, 6 nights in a row, and that's just an incredible learning situation for the students in the ensemble and for me as the conductor. You sort of peel away levels of obfuscation, is the way I look at it. Things that are keeping you from the absolute core of the piece. Every time you can get at it in performance, more so than in rehearsal, things become a little bit more clarified, a little bit more solidified. The interpretation becomes deepened, and that happens with all the groups around here. I've got the jazz band has won a Downbeat Award twice in the last 10 years. The St. Olaf Orchestra has won the American Prize twice in the last couple of years. The St. Olaf Choir just was at Carnegie Hall a couple of nights ago. My colleague Anton is celebrating his 30th anniversary at the helm. I'm the young one around here at 26 years in one position. Steve is going to retire next year at 38 years with the orchestra. And so there's that longevity. It's a combination of very strong support tied to the fact that we all have a similar sense for the role of music and what kind of gift it is to us. We consider it a divine gift, basically. It's a church school. Not everybody is a Lutheran here, for example, but we do acknowledge the fact that music is important in that regard, and it's a crucial means of expression, and we should be giving it our full attention and our greatest efforts. And it's been going on for a long, long time here.
Yeah, and that's really cool to hear, especially with how you have been working alongside your colleagues for such a long time. As you had mentioned, your one colleague now is going on 38 years, but also that your other colleague is especially an alum. So to talk about that a little bit, especially with the school that you have invested a lot of your academic time as a student, but also professionally as a conductor and educator, So, with overtaking a program from your alma mater, could you talk a little bit about maybe whenever you were in college, were there any traditions of the St. Olaf band program that were highly regarded as being, those types of traditions that lived throughout the decades? And maybe even then, whenever you took over the program as the acting director of bands, just with those types of traditions or your vision of the program, how did you take those traditions, if there were any, and how did you then kind of turn the program towards your own vision to what it is today?
It's been an interesting transformation. I'll admit to that. We are loaded with tradition here. We have an early morning softball league that they play softball twice a week in the spring at 6:30 in the morning. The orchestra plays the choir and the band and some of the other musical groups. We have a broken bat trophy. That's an actual wooden bat that was broken in 1974, and the winner between the band and orchestra game at the end of the spring season gets the carved band or orc into the bat. That's pretty unusual, just getting any musician up at that time of day, let alone getting them outside and playing softball. All sorts of traditions, hay rides, ice cream socials. They have their own, they call it a three-org prom or tri-org prom. They do a prom between the orchestra, band, and choir at the end of the year. The I inherited a group. One of the best traditions was the fact that they elect officers and they assign everybody to some kind of work crew, so that when we're out on the road or when we're doing any performing, the students are taking care of all the setup, all the tear down, all the trucking, putting percussion instruments back in cases, tearing them apart, assembling them again night after night. And I don't lift a finger. My job is to make sure my scores are ready and to be the leader on the podium. It's a fantastic situation, and it was going with my predecessor, Miles Johnson. He basically was the one who established this for the band. And when I came in, I just tried my hardest not to mess up. It was like you've been driving a really great car. I had a wonderful program at UMD, and I would have been happy staying there. I would say that truthfully right now. Uh, but my alma mater was calling, and it was a different kind of situation with the touring and some of the other stuff, and I wanted to investigate that. And so when I got here, I'm not going to mess up this Lamborghini that I get to drive now. And about the only tradition that we've added, my wife and I, is that we have a Christmas party at the house, holiday party, and all the students come over to the house, and that's sort of a normal kind of thing. But what we do is we have them come over in November sometime on a Saturday, and we make probably 15 ice cream buckets full of cookies, frosted cookies, you name it, all these different recipes that the students have supplied over the years. And we use the cookies, then we put them in the freezer, and then we thaw them out and use them at the party in December. And you wouldn't think that you'd get a lot of kids interested in baking cookies, but they have to do it in 3 shifts of 20 people each. And so when they're doing things like that together, when they're traveling together, having a different what they call a bus date, where they sit with the same person all day and they change over the next day, and they're staying in hotel rooms, they're eating all their meals together for an extended tour. These kinds of sort of uh, amusical relationships. They have nothing really to do with, sitting down with a horn in front of your face and making black dots come alive. Uh, but it has everything to do with that, because these people they care about each other, and they are uh, willing to take chances with each other, and they're supportive of each other. And so the efforts that we can make in the rehearsal hall, trying to carve out this music in a meaningful way, becomes very powerful.
Yeah, and that's really cool to hear. Along with the traditions, it sounds like there's a very strong sense of community within the band itself, almost like what you would see in a very comprehensive high school program. And that's really neat to see that type of community carry over into a collegiate setting. And especially as you mentioned with the softball league, is that something you and your colleagues get involved with time to time as well?
Yeah, we'll go down. I'll show up at the broken back game. That's as far as I go. They don't need to have us playing, you know. There's an old story that my predecessor would show up and he would just walk up to bat and he would take one swing and hit it out of the park. He was a really very fine athlete. Run around the bases and keep running the rest of the way home. He was done for the day. Yeah, yeah. I mean, go have some fun. I think any director listening to this right now would understand that you got to let the students know there's a human side to you, and let them have some fun making fun of you and kidding around with you and laughing and so on. All of that, once again, makes the music making that much stronger.
Certainly. So now to talk a little bit about your role as an acting conductor and educator, and this is really intriguing to me, especially with your background as a composer. Could you talk a little bit about your thoughts on repertoire selection, and even especially repertoire selection towards a program for a wind band?
Well, I think keeping the audience member in mind is paramount. That we're there to educate them just as much as we're there to entertain them. Certainly, the principal thing is the curriculum for the student and the ensemble, but I'm talking about also the putting together a program that will engender stronger and stronger support for you from your audience members and general public. There's a sort of tried and true tradition of having the program feel like it's a fine multi-course meal with varied entrees, appetizers, sorbets, desserts, things along these lines. And I think that's a pretty safe and secure way to approach programming. I'm always interested in uh, trying to hear the totality of it. And one of the tricks that I do is to put together a recording of the show, basically, uh, finding recordings online. And I used to make a full CD, and way back in the day, a cassette. And then when I had to drive somewhere, I would listen to the concert, and I would consider how one piece flowed to the next, to the next, to the next. And I think that's part of it as well. We just got done having a themed program for the California tour. It's called Imagining Peace, and it was intentional that we tried to share music that would help the listener uh, quiet their uh, world around them and give them a chance to reflect on the need for peace and justice in this world and think about their own level of activism. I mean, that's a pretty different thing than trying to just uh, make sure they hear some Broadway tunes and a march, and they hear a flashy overture and a nice little quiet tune. I mean, there was a real intent to that program, and it worked really well. This is a very fresh memory for me right now, and it illustrates the power that we have as the directors, as the people who are, you know, picking the curriculum that we're going to study uh, in shaping community thinking. We can help, and you have to be careful about it. You can't be politically minded with it and biased in any way. But I think there are generalized ways that we can have our art form serve to better our communities, and we take that pretty seriously.
So, one big thing that a lot of people talk about, especially whenever we are programming music for students, especially, is providing with the highest quality of music and repertoire. And we can often break that down into specific things of substance, whether it be harmonic content, melodic content, form, structure, whatever they may be. So with each of those parameters, a lot of people might do this through simply score study, or even just going through the J.W. Pepper catalog and doing a lot of listening and trying to define what they define as a quality piece of music. So could you talk a little bit about maybe how, if you're going about looking at a specific piece, how would you define quality repertoire that could be tied into a comprehensive music program?
Well, you're already alluding to it. All the various musical factors need to be controlled and creatively used so that the end product has a voice that has integrity. I'm a composer who's been doing it for quite some time now. I think I'm right up around 90 works for band, and uh, I'm a hard man to please. I know what I'm looking for in my own writing. I'm too close to it to be able to judge my own writing. That's for others to do. But in that process, I've I've come to respect greatly uh, aspects of creative, genuine writing, and I'm looking for it all the time. And if it impresses me as a fine work of composition, I'm interested. I want to see what that might be able to do as a teaching device for the band program here. Um, Sometimes it's the affect that it has. What kind of emotional expression is being encountered by the listener when they are hearing the piece. Sometimes it'll be a work that is challenging and difficult for the audience. It's great writing. It pushes the medium. It allows us to grow as an ensemble, and it might not be the most pleasing moment in the concert, but it needs to be heard. The California tour was by and large contemporary writing. We alternated a Carl King and a Sousa March. Those were the oldest pieces, other than a setting of a six-part motet by Monteverdi that I included, that I had done a few years back, and that's 400 years old. And so we balanced the new with a little bit of the old. But we, as wind band conductors, are living in an incredible age right now. We've got more and more really fine composers looking at the medium and understanding the potential for expression and the level of interest that we have uh, given them. And I noticed this as a member of the adjudication panel for the Ostwald Award, for example, through the American Bandmasters Association, where you know weeding our way down from 100 or more submissions down to the final 12, the final 4, the finalist, and it's amazing over the last 20 years or so the level of increased interest and quality of writing. It's very exciting.
Yeah, and to touch on that a little bit, then, especially as we had already discussed a little bit, is something that you are well regarded to, in addition to your career as a conductor and educator, is your work as a composer. So, to speak on that a little bit, then, could you talk a little bit about your work as a composer, and to start off with that, then, too, maybe how you got into the compositional process in your writing?
Oh, I wanted to impress a girlfriend, or at least someone I would like to have been my girlfriend. This was back in about eighth grade or so, and I'd been playing trombone since I got my uncle's trombone when I was in third grade, so I'd got sort of an early start. I could barely hold the instrument, but I was already buzzing away on it, and I was always a little bit ahead of the other kids in the class because I had that head start. And then I had piano lessons. My mom started me on piano. She was a piano teacher, and then she farm me out to another teacher at the appropriate time. And so I had some musical skills, nothing to really brag about, but I found that I could sort of make up stuff on the piano, and I started to write songs, trying to, see if a girl would notice I was playing the piano in the band room or something like that. It never really worked, but it did foster this interest I had in creating some music. I wrote brass works. I play trombone, God's instrument, and I would write for the other kids in my church who also played brass, and we would play, hymn arrangements or little fanfares and stuff like this. And they'd give me really, terse feedback on my writing. Usually, this isn't any good, or you got to fix this, or whatever it was. And now those friends were my first critics. They helped me hone my craft. And then I got to college, and actually in high school, it was I grew up when Blood, Sweat, and Tears in Chicago were on the radio all the time, and I was lifting their tunes and making arrangements of them for our jazz band. And gradually, I started becoming more interested in writing my own stuff rather than arranging other people's music. I had some good training here at St. Olaf when I came to school. Art Campbell was my principal composition teacher, a stoic, quiet man with sort of a severe language of his own composition, but he nurtured me with all sorts of advice and support. And people, wonder, well, who else did you study composition with? And I took about 4 lessons in grad school at the University of Iowa while I was trying to do a trombone performance degree on a master's level. I couldn't keep up with the people because they were all grad students, and they were expected to write another movement for their string quartet in 1 week, and I was in the practice room trying to do my trombone, so I fell behind, and I just dropped the course. And that's the last time I studied composition with anybody in that lesson format. I study composition every day of my life through looking at other people's scores, the works that I conduct, the works that I'm listening to and studying that I hope to conduct someday, orchestral pieces, choral works. If you have had the interest sparked in you to be inquisitive about this, you hear something that catches your ear, you aren't satisfied until you go figure out how it was written. How did they make that work? And sometimes you can, the more skilled you get at this, you can hear something and you can sort of figure it out. Or you go grab that score and you start looking at voicings and, all the things that made that a special moment. You fill your notebook full of, mental notebook for me typically, full of ideas of how to develop musical materials, how to score with interesting chromal kinds of sounds, colored sounds, and so on. And you put it all together, and those scores, I think, have been my strongest teachers by far and away.
Yeah, that's kind of really cool, especially with your story of how almost you kind of broke away from the, we'll say, more typical process now of what you'll see from people going through schools of composition in the lesson type format, in that a lot of what you do is through the study of just music and the score itself. So, along with that is a lot of time, especially within your work as a conductor, a lot of people even will talk about the time involved outside of rehearsal, or especially even for a public school music teacher, what we would just call our work hours, and really just getting to know the music, studying music, and advancing your knowledge base of music as a whole. And one area where that can really be kind of an open-ended topic into how we can really manage that, especially with the stressors of a typical music educator in their day-to-day life, is just finding that work-life balance of finding time to work on specific things, whether it be score study or to practice conducting or to work on different things. So, and this is where I'm really intrigued, especially with you having a career as a composer, and with all the other different things you do in your career. Could you talk a little bit about how you balance a career as an educator and composer, and any advice you may have for anybody who may be looking to have that kind of balance themselves with other facets outside of their work hours, so to say?
Yeah, we could talk about this for a long time. I'm nearing retirement, and I can look back upon a career with hindsight, and thereby some clarity comes with it. I've learned to be able to forgive myself, to let myself know that that was an okay effort. That's good enough. It's not going to be perfect. We have this incredible challenge in front of us to make our music perfect, and it will never be. It'll get close sometimes, and it's such a seductive job. It will suck every minute out of your life if you let it, and you can't. You can't let it do that. Find a hobby. Take care of yourself physically. I run occasionally. I try to do a 5K every year. One of the pieces I wrote this past fall I call "Old Man Run." I basically wrote it while I was out trying to get myself trained up to run a 5K. I am a numismatic hobbyist. That means I'm a coin collector, and I'm a member of the Bust Half Nut Club, the only one from Minnesota. We specialize in half dollars minted between 1807 and 1836, and I have a growing specialist level of knowledge of that. I've been working on it for a couple of decades now, and it's nerdy as all get out, and I don't care. I hold history in my hand. I think about old minting operations. I'm looking to cherry pick rare coins for cheap prices where I can, increase the value of them in a hurry and make money off of them. And all of this kind of stuff is fun, and it's not being a band director, and it's not composing. I have to be careful about this because it's easy to say yes to commission offers because they sound enticing and interesting, and yeah, I'll do that. And you can overbook yourself rather easily if you're not careful. And I'm a full-time band director. Some of these people who are writing the really great stuff for us right now are full-time composers, and you can hear it in their craft. They're just knocking it out of the park. I'm a band director, and I sort of dabble in writing music, and I've been fortunate to have people back that. I was just going home today, and I've got a premiere tomorrow night with the Maryland Winds. They're doing the pre-premiere of a work that was commissioned for the Music for All National Honor Band coming up in Indianapolis in March. And Tim Holton, retired Colonel Holton, is the conductor, and he's been fantastic in helping to comb through this score, and we're finding little bits of errata here and there. And each one of them is like a nail into my skull because you don't like having mistakes, but it's a 12-minute piece, 3 movements, and there's probably 25,000, 30,000 different markings in just the score. Finale has a counter on it. You can count these things. And, if you're 99% accurate, which is a pretty great ratio of accuracy, that means there are 300 mistakes yet, which makes it unplayable. And so right now I think we've found 20 or 30 mistakes, nothing major, but little nitpicky things, and that's 99.9% accuracy. And so on the way home, this just happened today. I said, that's good enough. You want it to be perfect, but it's really hard to make it perfect. And I think more than anything else, I would share that with some of the young conductors, you got to be really careful about having the job just completely take over. When you're young, you don't know as much, and so you have a lot more work to do. And then as you've done it a few times, you learn to relax with things. You've already taken your group to contest 5 times now. Relax. You know how to do that. You already have done a marching band show for a few years. Okay, relax a little bit. You know that it will work. Trust your student leadership. Trust your parent groups. Get anybody to do anything for you so that you can be the guy or gal who studies the scores and makes the music happen, and you're not the one who's handing out uniforms and taking in fundraising money and stuff like that. There are those kinds of things that can help free up your time as well. Read books, go watch the sunset. I'm not telling you anything new here, but these are really hard lessons to learn. And the sooner you learn them, I think the healthier you're going to be, and your bands are probably going to get better too.
Certainly, and I know the one big thing that we all, that at least I know in a lot of my own study with conducting is just the time involved with score study to look at it as a piece of with a piece of music, I should say, just on multiple levels. But one thing that I feel that sometimes in the study of conducting is just a pedagogical approach, maybe is, if you will, to looking into how what we have in our content, so what we would have in the music that we're studying, but then looking at how we program that into my day. So where I can relate this to is when I was in my undergraduate work, I was a saxophone major, but I remember my professor at the time, my saxophone instructor, sat me down and kind of walked through, okay, minimum 2 hours a day, but this much of your time will be spent on etudes. This much of your time is spent on technical study. This percentage of your time in the practice room is spent on just your repertoire or your solos. So with that said, I know a lot of people talk about, especially with the importance of score study and time. So if you were to maybe take a step back a few decades ago, and maybe step into a role as a public school band director, say at the high school level, and you had a job where maybe you would get home by 5:30 every day, depending on what would be going on after school. But even if you had maybe a recommended amount of time just for a conductor or somebody who's leading a program to maybe try to budget or dedicate to score study or the actual practice of conducting itself. Would you have any recommendations for times to maybe set aside on a practical sense, or how one could maybe approach looking at budgeting that time?
Yeah, I think people discover when they are most creative, most alert, most open. Early in my career, that was late at night for my writing. I would stay up really late, and I wasn't married at the time, and I could bang away on the piano. I lived out in the country, and that was the time. I could make that work. I was not a morning person, and now I am a morning person because fear makes me get out of bed for meeting deadlines and so on. And I find that if I can push myself out of bed at 5 o'clock or something like this, I get in some really quality hours of work before the rest of the world starts to cave in on me. I'm tired at night then. There's only so many hours in a day when you can be awake, but you might find that shifts around a little bit. Um, Most of the score study, in all honesty, happens in the summer for me. If I'm renting a piece, sometimes I don't have as immediate access to the score that I would like, and I have to learn it a little bit more quickly during the school year. But if you can get that ground level score study done when you can do it sitting outside with a beverage and in the shade of a tree, just relaxing at the same time, that's a really great way to accomplish that task. If you're under the gun to do score study, that's a whole different animal, and you might be missing some things in the process. There's the old macro, micro, macro kind of approach where you take in the score like you're reading a magazine or a book, just what's the overall sense of it, and then you bore down until you're looking at individual measures, chord voicings, and rhythm patterns, and things like that. And then you build it back out again, and that all takes time, obviously. Um, if you're trying to jam 5 minutes of score study in before the students arrive that day, it's going to be unhealthy in the long run, I think, because you feel it's happened to me many times. Nobody's perfect, and you hit the podium and you're not prepared. You're not prepared, and you can sort of fake your way through this or that, but it's not going to be your best teaching or the best situation for the students. If you can calmly come to reasoned decisions about interpretation and understanding with the material that you're going to share with these students, then you have a much better chance of devising stronger lesson plans, being ready with your ears to detect concerns, and perhaps already have some teaching strategies figured out how to deal with the problems that are going to arise. My best rehearsals are always the ones where I'm calm because I'm prepared. I'm excited because I know that I'm going to be able to go deeper into the music because I'm not going to be worried about missing a meter change or something like this. I would add that I'm making mistakes every day of my life on that podium. Nobody's perfect up there.
Yeah, those are some great points, Tim. So, to talk a little bit more about your work as a composer, and especially with what you do as an educator and conductor of wind bands, could you talk a little bit about how your work as a composer has influenced your career as an educator, or even vice versa?
Mm-hmm. The first thing I would say is that nothing beats being on the podium and conducting my own music. Other people conduct it better than I do, I think, because they don't have that connection. I'm too close to it. They study the score differently and sense possibilities differently than I do. But on the same token, it's just as a personal kind of thing. This music used to just be floating around in your head, and all of a sudden it's coming out of the tip of your baton. That's pretty amazing. I give sessions regularly at clinics about studying scores from a composer's perspective, and I think it's a valuable thing to do for any conductor, that they perhaps zero in on the decision-making process. Can you understand or try to surmise the various decisions that were made to at any point in the score, so that you can understand the motor driving the music, for example. At any point in the score, there's an implication as to what will happen next. This is the old Leonard Mahr implication realization theory at play here. And a composer could, given a single idea, could have taken it in 4 different directions, and they only got to use one of them, and the others are left on the cutting room floor, so to speak. Can you figure out why that decision was made and why the composer thought that was the best way to do it? They have these wonderful facsimile editions of the Beethoven sketch scores, where you see what he crossed out. You see what didn't get included in the final composition. If someone like Beethoven was making music happen with that kind of decision making, it's certainly good enough for the rest of us, and it, I think, alerts us to the fact that the construction of the music in and of itself is exactly that. It's construction. It's creating a 4-dimensional being. It exists with breadth and height and depth, and then it hurtles forward in time. These are amazing structures. How do they get put together? And so that's my I'm talking about this because this is what I do as a composer. I try to make these things come together, and I look for that kind of process in the other scores that I study of all the other composers that I'm programming. Can I get inside their head? Can I understand the piece from the composer's viewpoint? And that just uh, refocuses my understanding and my teaching efforts because of what I discern.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear that perspective, Tim. And now to talk a little bit about even now with some of your specific work as an educator, these are some questions that we ask all guests on the show. But specifically, even with your group at St. Olaf, or even if you have other conducting endeavors, say with honors groups, could
Mm-hmm.
you describe one or two of your favorite rehearsal tactics?
I tell you, the older I get, the more I realize that if I can get them to just deal with sound production and understanding intonation, uh, that the dividends pay off with every other piece that I'm doing. And so at the beginning of the year with our groups here, or my adult group, the Minnesota Symphonic Wind, certainly with the honor bands that I work with, all state groups, those opening moments uh, of warm up and so on are crucial. And we talk about, idiomatic tone production and things along these lines. One thing that I found to be very helpful, and it depends on the acoustic situation of the rehearsal hall or auditorium or stage or wherever you're at, if you can start to hear the overtones within the tuning notes being played by the tubas. If they're playing a tuning note, their upper B flat, an octave and a fifth higher, you should hear an F ringing in their sound if they're blended and in tune. It's pure. It's a sort of a sine wave as opposed to some kind of jagged sound wave, but it's there, and you can use that as a model. I'll have them play it again, and I'll sing it with a real clear tone so they know what pitch to be listening for, and it's just this guided listening process happening. Can you hear the overtone? And raise your hand if you hear it. And out of a band of 150, a massive honor band, you might get 20 or 30 hands that come up right away. And then you add in some more of the instruments, and as they blend their sounds and really get in tune, all of a sudden the F is more prominent and more hands go up. I think that's a great lesson for them to go home with. I apply it with my own playing on the trombone. If I can't hear a rich harmonic spectrum in my tone, I know I have to just sit and work on my tone. And if the tone isn't any good, why do anything else, right? It's got to be a good sound. And so those kinds of exercises I found to be quite useful. The other one is just the a simple uh, way of understanding how to support the tone through the full value of the uh, duration. Yeah, I'll write a capital T and a small A and a small H on the board. Ta. And I'll have them say that with a sort of a pronounced T at the beginning of it. Ta, ta, like that. And then I'll say, okay, now let's turn this around, and I draw a small T and a big A and a big H, and I say ta, 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 and there's hardly a T at the beginning of it. It's all about the resonance of it. And I'll draw on the board a picture of the initial attack, decay, sustain, and release of the tone, and say that when you get to the ah, that's the sustain quality. That's the blendable point in all of this. You can record a trumpet and a clarinet playing the same pitch and digitally slice off the attack so that you just listen to that sustain quality, and they're remarkably similar. And that's where the blend is in our tone production. When we're playing nice long slurred passages, it's easier to blend because we're not interrupting it with ta articulations all the time. And the young players tend to be overly explosive with all of that as they force sound out of their instruments, and it takes time to learn how to relax that and support it from lower down with better breath support. Those are the basics. Every group I work with, these are some of the first things I address. And it's the kind of thing that over the course of an honor band weekend, they start to understand. Typically because the honor band kids are bright. They're ready, they're hungry, and hopefully they take it home and share it with their friends back home.
Certainly, those are some good points, especially on with playing in tune and with blended balance. So, to talk a little bit more about music in general, if anyone were to ever ask you, why do we teach music in public schools, and what is its importance to the educational experience, what would you say to that question?
Well, there's the never-ending battle, being able to convince the people who don't understand why it is we do what we do. I It depends on who's asking. To be honest with you, I try to understand their vantage point, what level of misunderstanding they might be having, because you can take this argument a couple of different ways and have people connect with it. You can talk about the connection music has with all the other academic subjects and so on, and some people will say, "Oh, I didn't realize that," and I get that now. And for others, you can talk about the purely aesthetic value of artistic expression in general, and music in particular, and how crucial it is to the human experience, and how global it is as a communicative language. And they might understand that. I had a teacher here who would just help me try to understand that. I'm sure you've heard this before. Why music? Because music. It's very challenging to learn how to talk about this. It's something that I think every music education major should be working on in a number of different classes. Can you answer this question? Can you talk about music in a believable way to someone who doesn't get it? Um, for some, they would support your efforts more if they just understood what kind of social group activity it provides. It helps ACT scores. We see all these different arguments, and they all are supportive of the fact that it's a strong experience that should be made available to as wide a range of students that the staffing could make happen. There's a really strong push lately about not even have it being ensemble driven in the public schools. That's been a narrowing process, and it should be broadened into a much more of a general music kind of offering for all students. And there's some merit to that thinking, I think, and it's worth a serious discussion. I'm not ready to give up on the ensemble experience by any means, but I think we can take a look at what we're doing for the students who aren't in the ensembles and try to make sure they're also having really viable creative musical experiences.
Yeah, and those are lots of good points, especially with how you mentioned it really depends on who you're talking to. I remember in my collegiate undergrad experience again, one of the big components of the music ed curriculum was really developing a philosophy for music education. And I remember my one professor had talked to, kind of along those similar lines where, write a one-page philosophy where if you were to publish this for the MENC or whatever the organization was at that time for the, the local journal that we always
Hmm.
get in the mail, but then also, write a philosophy for somebody that may be a little bit more involved in the decision-making process for schools, as, they're not really going to maybe, in lack of better terms, sometimes care as much just about the aesthetic experience. What else does it do? And that's really cool that that you had mentioned, even just with, it really depends on who you talk to and what we can each value from looking into that. So with that then said too, obviously we've talked a lot about a lot of things you've done in your career, where you went to school, returning to your alma mater to work, working with some high-profile people, like even like David Maslanka, to all the other stuff you've done, even with your colleagues. So obviously, you've had a lot of people inspire you in your career, professionally and personally. So could you talk a little bit about maybe some of the people that have inspired you in your life and any lessons that you have taken away from them?
Yeah, I have someone I call my musical father. That would have been the band director at St. Olaf when I was here, and the person I replaced in the position, Miles Johnson. His nickname was Mighty Johnson, and he exuded such a care for his students and a level of expertise with his programming and teaching ability and level of demand. He built this program here even though we're 128 years old now or whatever, it was sort of a struggling program back in the 50s, and he built it up into an amazing program over the course of his career. And I've always drawn great inspiration from observing what he had done, let alone learning from him how he was able to do it. I look back at my other band directors, Bill Baker at La Crosse Central High School in Wisconsin. He opened up all sorts of opportunities for me to conduct and to arrange and to chart marching band shows. And I knew that he had my back, and he was challenging me as soloists and so on. I was very fortunate to have a man who detected in me a future music educator and helped me come to make my own decision about going down that route. For the longest time, I thought I was going to be a chem major. I really like chemistry. And that shifted after I just started to wave a stick around a little bit and found out that I really would much rather spend my time doing that. It's been an incredible career. I tell my students, don't you ever worry if you hear that I die in a car accident or something. Just know that I lived in a completely full life. I'm blessed beyond my means, and I've had experiences that are just indelibly inked on my brain and fulfill me. I can just sit quietly for the next 20 years and remember stuff that I did and probably be a happy man. You know, it's such a great way to make life happen. It's a moderate wage. You don't get rich doing this, but you usually have enough money to get by and live somewhat comfortably. But the rewards are amazing. So are the actual number of vacation days. I've got brothers who are doctors and lawyers and so on, and they make more money than I do, but I've had much more time than they've had.
Yeah, and it's always a good thing to have that summer vacation as well, with the extra time.
Oh, yeah.
So certainly then, to wrap some things up here then, if you had to give any advice to music teachers to help their students best thrive, what would that advice be?
They need to know that you care. They desperately need to know that you care. This world right now is just absolutely broken. I think it's important to maybe have them understand that you're holding them to high standards because they need to help improve things. It's within their power to do good in this world, and we need that. I think we've been talking about being prepared and studying your scores, and all that sort of nuts and bolts stuff is certainly crucial. But to be able to find within your heart an openness for the special qualities of every student in your program will carry you down the road in an amazing way. It's not an easy thing to do. I think the good Lord gave us an incredible capacity to love. You might think, I can't love another person. I'm overextended, and then that next person will come along and you say, well, okay, I'll love you too. You know, it's the students sense this, and then it helps them make those personal decisions about being self-motivated to do the very best that they can do. You can sleep well at night.
It's good advice there, Tim. So, with that then said, I'd like to thank you again for all of your time and help here on the podcast. It's been a pleasure having you on, and best wishes to you and your students as you continue with your semester.
Well, I appreciate this chance to visit. It always pays to sit and talk about these things because it helps you to define your own life a little bit more. I've learned something just talking with you, so thank you for that.
This concludes our episode. Many thanks to Dr. Timothy Mahr for sharing his time, wisdom, and insight on the compositional process, as well as ways to engage and lead students towards musical excellence. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play Music, and iHeartRadio, as well as looking up the show on Facebook under Director Circle and liking our page to stay updated on all future events and episodes. This is Doug Conrad saying thank you for listening, and be sure to tune in to the next edition of Director's Circle.